What is up, guys? It's Carter Wajenko back here from the tackle box. Just got back from Lake of the Ozarks. Fished the MLF Toyota Series down there, and actually just uploaded my video on my other channel, the Urban Angler, on that whole tournament. So if you guys want to go watch that, check the link right up there. But today we're going to be doing an in-depth tackle breakdown of how I caught them. Down there in Lake of the Ozarks. Spent 7 days down there pre-fishing and then fishing the tournament, so I got a lot of experience in fishing this cold water. And today I'm going to be breaking down what tackle you guys need when you're going into a similar situation. This was a highland reservoir. You know, highland reservoirs generally have lots of rock, very, very, very little grass, or none at all. Most of the time, you know, they had a lot of steep banks, super deep lake overall. Lots of areas were 100+ feet, and we were fishing lots of bluffs where that bank would drop very steep. And we were fishing for a mixture of largemouth and spotted bass. And what we got right here is a jerkbait. So right when we got there, the first day we launched, and the water temp was 36 degrees. There were still chunks of ice floating everywhere around the lake, and there were a lot of places where you couldn't run on plane. And then mixed in with that ice was a bunch of dead shad. So lots of gizzard and threadfin shad in that lake. You know, they had a super cold winter. I believe it froze all the way over for the first time in almost 10 years. As a result of that, a lot of the shad died and were still dying when we got there. So those fish were gorging themselves on those dying shad. And a really good imitator of those dying shad right here is a jerkbait. We were watching these threadfin in the water and these gizzard shad, you know, swimming maybe a foot under the surface. And what they would do, they would try to move, and then they would stop, and then they would try to move, and they would stop. And for those of you guys who have experience fishing a jerkbait, that is exactly what this thing looks like in the water. And that's why it was such a dominating bait for a lot of the guys that were fishing the tournament down there at Lake of the Ozarks. And then another bait I personally did not catch any fish on, but a lot of people caught fish on, was an Alabama rig. Very popular bait in the early spring, a great imitation of a larger school of bait. Especially in dirtier water. You know, Lake of the Ozarks was anywhere from 1 to 2 feet of water clarity. I fished in a lot of different water clarities that week. You know, I was a co-angler, so I got to experience different parts of the lake, down towards the dam, and then I went up the rivers as well. And the water temperature really varied from a lot of different places. It was fishing in around 40, I believe high 30s to 40s. And what a lot of the boaters were doing were utilizing their live scopes and throwing that Alabama rig over the brush piles, and then they would watch that fish come up and eat it. But as a co-angler, I was fishing for a lot of those fish that were up on the bank, not in the brush piles, but they were up on the bank. You know, during the tournament, the sun was out, and those fish were coming up onto the bank as the day moved on, because those rocks heated up, the water heated up, and they wanted to come up there and feed. And that was really my opportunity to throw this jerkbait. The first day I did not catch a fish. We just really weren't around them. The next day, drew an awesome boater. We fished around mainly the same area the whole day. We were targeting these points on the outside of spawning pockets, and those fish were obviously coming out of winter, and that was the first pit stop they were making. We're on those points, lots of bait around those points, and they were just gorging themselves on shad. And the main bait that I used was the Megabass Vision 110. All the gear that I'm going to mention right now is going to be in the description, so make sure to go check it out. Obviously, not a lot of other jerkbaits that can compete with this thing right here. And definitely a more expensive jerkbait, but worth it when you're fishing for a lot of money. Right here we got M shad, so there was a lot of different colors that played for me. You know, when you got low light, we had sun, we had wind, we had no wind, and we had varying water temperatures. So that all those factors there really played in my choice in colors for jerkbait. But to break it down into more simpler terms, what I mostly did in the sun, you're gonna want a transparent color. So GP stain reaction was a really good color when that sun was out. And then when it was more cloudy or there was low light in the mornings, another color that I wanted to go with was a more solid color. So something like this M Shad right here. Ozark Shad was another really good one. Table Rock Shad. Anything solid when you have that low light really helps those fish find that bait. As well as in muddy water, you're going to want to have a bait like this one right here. Gives off a little bit more flash in the water. So I did run stock hooks in warmer water. That bait's going to float up a little bit more. You're going to want to weight it down. Really the key with fishing this jerkbait was getting it to suspend in between pauses. So those fish are super lethargic and you're jerking this bait past them and they start following it. And right when you stop, you give it that pause and it's sitting there perfectly in the water column. You know, maybe a slow flow or a slow rise to imitate a dying shad. Those fish are gonna sit there and they're gonna just inspect this bait, and a lot of times they'll mouth it or eat it right on that pause, and that's when you're gonna get bit. So that's a really big key with fishing the jerkbait, making sure you have the right equipment so that that bait can suspend and sit perfectly in the water column. The rod that I used, I ordered it actually right before, just for this tournament, was the Dobyns Sierra 683, not a glass rod. So the reason I went with that, talked to a couple of my buddies who have had experience with this rod, and a couple of the other rods in the Dobyns lineup. So 684 CP is a great option as well for a jerkbait, gonna be a little softer tip. The reason I went with the 683, I was expecting, you know, these fish are going to be deep. I'm going to be throwing the +1s and the +2s, and I'm going to need a little bit extra power and more control, and that's why I went with the 683, as well as being a little bit more stout. Just in my opinion, gives you a little bit more control. If I was throwing the regular size, I'm probably going to get one as well. A 682 is another great option, but it was a great rod to me this week. Has a full grip handle, pretty short. I kind of like the shorter handle with these treble hook baits. Just gives you a little bit more wiggle room, you know, on your side, and you're not really setting the hook too hard. You're just leaning into them. So, fan of that. Super high quality rod. Like I've said in previous videos, the Sierra liner rods is super comparable to the Champion XP liner rods, but it is a lot cheaper. I believe almost $100 cheaper than Champion XP. So this is, in my opinion, the best rod that you can buy for the money from Dobyns or the Champion XP. And then I paired that with an SLX DC. So the DC was really crucial in my game plan for fishing this jerkbait. You know, when those fish were moving up shallow during the day, when that water was warming up, the SLX DC has an electronic braking system in it, and it allowed me to cast up right on the bank. You know, a lot of times I would get bit 1 to 2 feet off the bank. You would think those fish would be deeper, but you know, even in that super cold water, those fish were really up there shallow, and getting this bait as close to the bank as I could without snagging it was really crucial. So the SLX DC definitely helped with that, and it's a great reel, but you're definitely gonna have to put your time in with dialing in the brakes and the cast control to where you want it, because it's definitely not gonna perform right out of the package. I'll be honest with you. It really takes a lot of tuning to get this reel right. But I paired that with 10-pound Gamma Edge fluorocarbon. So I would say the line is one of the most, if not the most important part when it comes to fishing a jerkbait. Not a lot of guys are gonna tell you this, but when you guys are throwing this jerkbait and making really long casts, what I was doing as a co-angler, you know, letting out line as my boater was going down that bank, and what was really important was having a line that was supple and did not have a lot of memory on it. So I spooled up a fresh spool before the tournament just for this reason, because what happens with this line when you're throwing old line on a jerkbait, you make a long cast, you start you know, ripping that bait through the water, and then when you go to pause it, that line coils up. If it's old line and has memory in it, coils up, and it brings that jerkbait forward in the water column because it's pulling that line closer and it's coiling up. So if you have a line that does not have a lot of memory, it can stay straight in the water column when you're not giving it any tension. That is gonna allow this jerkbait to perfectly suspend and not move towards the boat. So that was a really key feature with the line. I spooled 10 pound. You know, you can vary the line size depending on where you're wanting to fish it. I fished, you know, in deep areas, shallow areas. 10 pound is a great all-around line size for throwing a jerkbait. If you want to go deeper, you can go with 8, or you know, if you're fishing in clear water, you can go with 8, or you can go to a heavier line if you're trying to get that bait shallower. Something I did not talk about earlier with this 110, so really varied from the +1 to the regular size. I did not throw the +2 as much as I thought I would, but the +1 or the regular size was really crucial, as well as the new +1 Junior. You know, there's threadfin shad in that lake as well, and that was a great way to imitate those threadfin shad, or throw something a little bit different than my boater. That +1 Junior definitely played, but you know, in the morning, those fish are out a little bit deeper, I was throwing this +1, and then as the sun came out, those fish started moving up towards the bank. I would pull out that regular size, and a lot of my fish came off of, you know, just having that bait on the bottom. And you know, with a lot of these banks that we were fishing, there was a little rock ledge, and I would pop that bait, it would get down, it would be ticking over the rocks, and I could feel it, and then it comes off that lip, and those fish are sitting on that lip watching my bait, and I pop it off that lip, and that's right when they would eat it. But anyways, it was a great trip. I learned a ton about winter fishing. Let me know in the comments if you guys got any questions at all about any of the gear that I use to throw this jerkbait. But that is an in-depth tackle breakdown of the MLF Toyota Series on Lake of the Ozarks, and we'll see you guys on the next episode of the Tackle Box. Thank you.